Hello, my name's Simon Hughes of Simian Risk Management, the Scaffolding Health and Safety Consultants, and I'm pleased to be presenting this video toolbox talk on behalf of the National Access and Scaffolding Confederation, NASC. In this talk, we're going to be looking at the use of handing over certificates, the role of a scaffold inspector, the statutory scaffold inspection requirements, and scaffold tagging systems. Let's start with handover certificates. Originally, scaffolding handover certificates were used as a commercial document that signified the start of the hire period once the scaffold had been handed over. They've now developed to become a safety critical document and are accepted by the Health and Safety Executive as evidence of first inspection, providing the report meets the legal minimum requirement of the work at height regulations. There is a standard template and safety guidance available from the NASC in SG 35. So, do handing over certificates need to be signed by the client? Well, no, but the NASC recommends that they should be. A handing over process needs to have issue and acceptance to be an effective system. However, the scaffolding contractor should keep a record of issue. For example, a fax receipt or an email read receipt as evidence that handing over certificate has been sent and received by the client. So who completes a handover certificate? Well, it has to be the scaffold inspector, a competent person as required by the work at height regulations. And when a handover certificate's to be completed? Well, if they're to be used as evidence of the first inspection under the work at height regulations, they need to be completed before the scaffold is taken into use for the first time, or after any substantial adaptation or modification. They must be completed within the same shift that the inspection was carried out and issued to the person responsible for the scaffold within 24 hours of the inspection being carried out. So let's look at the role of a scaffold inspector. Typically, there are three options available for carrying out these statutory scaffold inspections. You can do it yourself. Inspections undertaken by the user or hirer, usually the principal contractor or the client of the scaffolding contractor. The inspections can be subcontracted to the scaffolding contractor or even to an independent consultant. All of those options have their pros and cons. So who's responsible for a scaffold inspection? Well, they are a statutory requirement under the work at height regulations, so effectively they're the law. The principal contractor, usually the client or the hirer to the scaffolding contractor, is responsible for ensuring that the legal duty placed upon them is discharged. But as with any legal duty, the performance of that duty can be delegated, but the legal responsibility is retained. Failure to carry out these duties could result in prosecution, penalties, and a criminal record for the principal contractor, the CDM coordinator, the employer, which is the client or the scaffolding contractor, the management involved, the director, the manager, the supervisor, etc., who are responsible for the work, and ultimately the scaffold inspector themselves. So who is competent to inspect scaffolds? Well, the work at height regulations require a competent person. The employer must consider the qualifications or training, the relevant knowledge and experience for the scaffolds to be inspected. The NASC recommends that CISRS scaffolders can inspect structures covered by the Part 1 and Part 2 training. And then advanced scaffolders can also inspect structures covered by Parts 1, 2 and advanced. So effectively, as far as the NASC are concerned, if you're competent to put it up, you're competent to inspect it. Although we are aware that many clients, as part of their quality management processes, will not accept an inspection carried out by the scaffolders that actually erected the scaffold in the first place. A CISRS scaffolding supervisor can inspect structures also covered by the Part 1 and Part 2 courses, unless of course they hold an advanced scaffolder's card or an advanced scaffold inspection card. There is a new Construction Industry Scaffolders Record Scheme scaffold inspection training course or courses. These are training and assessment based and not competence. Employers still have to ensure that scaffold inspectors that hold these qualifications have the necessary knowledge and experience for the scaffolds that they're looking at. But it establishes a minimum training standard for our industry. There are 2 tiers to this training scheme. The basic scaffold inspection qualification, which, as you would expect, covers very basic structures. This course is aimed at anybody that is interested or required to carry out statutory scaffold inspections for basic scaffolds. And secondly, there is an advanced scaffold inspection training course. The advanced scaffold inspection course is open to existing CISRS scaffolders and advanced scaffolders. Anybody else wishing to progress to the advanced qualification would need to do the basic inspection course first and hold that card for at least 2 years before being eligible to the advanced course. So what about system scaffolding? Inspectors must be able to demonstrate that they have knowledge of the specific system being inspected, and it must be inspected in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions and any design if applicable. Effectively, they should have some sort of recognised product training. We're going to move on now and look at the requirements for statutory scaffold inspection. There is a general requirement to consider all work at height equipment, and they must be inspected before use. So scaffolds after erection or assembly must be inspected before they are used for the first time. Any scaffold that's exposed to conditions that could deteriorate the safe condition of that scaffold, for example, vibrations from road traffic, rail or plant equipment, there needs to be a judgment made by a competent person to ensure that the scaffold is inspected at suitable intervals, or after an event that's liable to jeopardise the safety of the scaffold, such as overloading, interference, impact from plant or other vehicles, exposure to adverse weather, such as high winds, etc. Employers have a responsibility to ensure that they have systems in place to maintain the safe conditions of the scaffold, and that deterioration in that safe condition can be detected and remedied in good time. There's a statutory requirement to inspect all scaffolds if they're used for construction or if a person could fall 2 metres or more. And it should not be used in that position unless it's been inspected within 7 days. And in the case of mobile scaffolds, they must be inspected on site within 7 days, even if they've been moved from position to position. Any scaffold which has lifting equipment that would fall under the lifting operations and lifting equipment regulations must have those LOLA inspections carried out, and those evidence of those inspections must be retained. So a statutory scaffold inspection should be visual or more rigorous as appropriate, and the NASC recommends that scaffold inspections should be visual and tactile inspections, and they should be carried out by a competent person, and include, where appropriate, any testing necessary. For example, the testing of masonry anchors used as scaffold ties. There is an NASC statement that's worth referencing for the definitions of a competent person, and the view of the NASC in terms of competence to inspect scaffolds. We're going to look at the requirements now for statutory scaffold inspection reports. The report is no longer a statutory document as in the old F91s that we're familiar with, but a report must be completed within the shift that the inspection was carried out in, and it must be issued to the person responsible for the scaffold within 24 hours of that inspection. It must be retained on site for the length of the construction work until all of the construction work is completed, and thereafter retained in a safe place such as an office for at least 3 months. However, the NASC recommend that handing over certificates and records of inspection should be kept for at least 3 years in the event of a civil claim. So what must be included in your inspection report? Well, obviously the name and address of the person for whom the inspection was carried out, the location of the work equipment that was inspected, and a description of that work equipment. For example, an independent tied scaffold to the perimeter. The date and time of the inspection, and the time's critical. A lot can happen on site between 8 o'clock in the morning when you did your first inspection to when you sit down later in the afternoon to start writing your report. So it's critical that the inspector records the time that the scaffold was actually inspected. A major change in the legislation brought about in 2005 by the Work at Height regs. There was a significant emphasis previously on the identification of defects or faults within the scaffold, and that's changed. You're now required to detail any matter identified that could give rise to the risk of health and safety to any person. So it's not just defects in the scaffold that you're looking for, you've also got to consider how the scaffold's being used and the workplace itself. Details of any action taken as a result of the inspection, and that could be removing access and displaying signs if the scaffold has any defects or issues that you've identified, and details of any further action that's considered necessary, recalling the scaffolders, for example, to remedy any interference with the scaffold. And finally, you need to record the name and the position of the person making the report. Now note that it doesn't require a signature, so this allows for scaffold inspection reports to be recorded electronically. For out-of-service scaffolds, for example, while the scaffold's being assembled, dismantled or altered, there is a general duty, which is a twofold duty. First of all, to display general warning signs to prohibit the use of the scaffold, and those warning signs must be in accordance with the safety signs and signals regulations, and physical means to restrict access. We're now going to look at user information or tagging systems for scaffolds, and as you can see, there is a wide range of tagging systems commercially available. These systems are effectively point of access information systems that identify whether the scaffold was fit to use at the time of the last inspection. These systems can be undermined though if there are multiple accesses to the scaffold, particularly if users can access the scaffold from within the building. But they only identify that the scaffold was fit to use at the time of the last inspection. So they don't guarantee that the scaffold is safe to use. So users still have to inspect the scaffold before they use it. So, in summary, we've looked at the role of handing over certificates in the construction industry and by scaffolding contractors. We've looked at the requirements for a competent scaffold inspector. We've looked at the statutory duties for scaffold inspection and the scaffold tagging systems available to users and scaffolding contractors. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video DVD, and for further information you can contact the NASC via their website or the contact details that are displayed on the screen now. Thank you very much.